Well, good afternoon. Thanks so much for having me. I came up late last night with my kids from San Francisco. It is a pleasure to be here. I am a corporate lawyer, and the first question to be asked is, what in the world is a corporate lawyer doing at Conservation Remix? And I'm honored to be asked to be here, but I increasingly intersect with the world of biologists and ecologists, and I'll go into that in a minute. But first, what does a corporate lawyer do? Really what I do is advise corporations, and in my case I work a lot with private equity, and I work a lot with companies, both large and small companies, primarily when they're raising money through selling securities or when they're buying and selling each other. And I say that and you still wonder what I'm doing at Conservation Remix. And why I'm here is I really think that there is an increasing awareness in the mainstream business community. I looked and we do have a diverse array of speakers here, but most of them are from nonprofits and most of them are from academia. And there's some very forward-looking and thinking entrepreneurs who are represented. But for the most part, mainstream business. How many here work for a Fortune 100 company? Anybody? Okay. I work for one of the 10 largest law firms in the United States, and it doesn't quite count as a Fortune 100 company. But it is one of the largest. And the other part of my job is I did something wrong in law school because I manage about 600 lawyers. But what has really happened, I think, is if you go to, and I teach at the Stanford Directors College on issues of sustainability and corporate governance. And if you go to the CEOs of the Fortune 100, I believe that 98 out of 100 of them would say, yes, we understand the imperative of environmental sustainability. Yes, we get the fact that we are depleting our natural resources. Yes, no, we don't follow Ron Paul. Yes, we do get that, in fact, climate change, global warming is happening, and we have to do something about it. And so why? Why are the organisms in this world, the organizations that control most of the capital, and in my world it's the corporations and private equity for the most part, and actually in your world as well, why aren't they doing anything about it? We're missing policy, as was talked about earlier, but we're also missing whole-scale corporate action. Corporations are doing things on a smaller scale. They're doing things in terms of CSR programs, and I'm going to talk about it in a second, but they're not going broader. And one of the things I realized when I started focusing on corporate form in about 2000 is that, in fact, there are constraints, structural and other policy and procedural constraints that keep corporations. Because if you look up here, you will see that PepsiCo and Barclays and KKR, and for those of you who don't know the three players in the private equity world, KKR, Carlyle, and the third one, sorry, I'm forgetting it right now, who controlled most of the flows of capital in this country. And so if these guys they would come here and they would listen and they would hear what people were talking about and they would understand why aren't they doing more about it. First, actually before I go into this, thanks to Kathy who turned my 46 slides on corporate governance into 15, so you can thank her ahead of time, because I feel this burning desire. I'm not nearly as funny as the speaker before me, but I do feel this burning desire for everyone to understand corporate law and corporate structure, because it is imperative that you understand it, because I believe even more than policy, even more than government, it is really what controls how everything is done in this country and the world. And so having people with some basic understanding of how corporations function, I think, is incredibly important. So thanks, Kathy. This is the only real slide that I'm going to talk about, and it's something that I want to reinforce for all of you who are shareholders. How many of you hold shares in any corporation? Almost all of you. I'm going to talk today about how we are redesigning corporations, but in fact, the current corporate form does allow corporations to go far beyond what they currently are doing in environmental sustainability. All of you should remember one thing from this talk, and it's that corporations have basic managers and boards of directors of corporations have fiduciary duties that are owed primarily to the shareholders, but those are tempered by what's called the business judgment rule. And the business judgment rule allows those folks to really take action in the long-term best interest of the corporations. And I've actually argued successfully that a corporation can go at least as far on issues of environmental sustainability as they do, say, with executive compensation. And if you read the newspaper at any time, you can see that executive compensation can be a huge part of the operating budget of a company. And so why have I spent, and I'm going to take a second and go back, why have I spent the last probably 12 years working on redesigning corporate form, if there's nothing really wrong with the existing corporate form? And I want to take it just a step back, because Kathy wanted me to talk about how I got here. What the introducer didn't say is I used to be a Republican. I was on the right, sort of on the right to libertarian. I'm now somewhere in the middle with the rest of you people, because I really don't know what the right answer is on the policy side, although I did vote for Obama, so my grandfather would roll over in his grave. But you know, what is it? You know, what is it that drove me to this place where I realized we had to really reconfigure corporate form? And it happened for me, I think, as a lot of things happen in life, just by happenstance. I made partner at my large law firm early in 2000, and before the big recession of 2008, we had, in California at least, and I think a lot of parts of the United States, the recession of 2001. And if you were somebody like me who does deals and issues securities, deal flow basically stopped in October of 2001. And what happened to me is when deal flow stopped, I actually started spending time with my husband. And we moved into the Presidio National Park, where he was a park steward, and I started going to hear people. And one of the first people I heard speak then was Janine Benyus, because in my normal life I don't have any free time, and I actually had time because there weren't any deals, and I went and heard her, and I've been working with her in the Biomimicry Institute ever since. And I went and heard people like Paul Hawken, and I was an economics major from Williams, and I at some point put together the fact that business, as business was operating, was just fundamentally, and the markets had fundamentally mispriced natural resources, and we were depleting natural resources to such an extent that business as business wasn't going to be able to continue to operate. And I fundamentally believe that. I don't know whether it's going to be 20 years or 40 years. I also believe that just by virtue of how all of us are living, the fact that I flew up here, and I'm going to take a car, I mean, all of us are going to be leaving the world in a much worse place than we found it. And I felt some compelling moral obligation to start doing something about it. And I started, the only thing I know other than swimming and my kids is corporate law. And so I started looking at the corporate form and saying, what is it about the corporate form? I understand how it works. I understand, at this point, I talk to a lot of them. I know that the CEOs of these companies and the boards, a lot of them even then care about these issues. I know that there's nothing inherent in the structure in the corporate form that's requiring people to act in this way. So why are they? And I also started looking around. I had I do have resources at my disposal. I actually had 2 associates spend 2 years looking all over the world at what people were trying, because a lot of countries are much further ahead of the United States in experimenting with corporate form and trying to figure out how they can make corporations more socially responsible. South Africa, for example, has the most progressive, and I use progressive in a positive way, progressive and exciting corporate form that I've seen. Australia, New Zealand, in Europe, it's very exciting, but it hasn't until recently happened here. And what I realized is that in addition to the corporate form, there are all kinds of other elements that are set up in our economic and our legal structure. The 10K and 10Q reporting, the quarterly reporting, the fact that our large corporations have to report regularly. And then you have a lot of people who bet positively or negatively, and there's this whole desire to beat the street and drive a need to beat the street. You have executive compensation. You have all the people who are making the decision at the top of these corporations. A lot of their executive compensation, all of their compensation is based on stock options. It's based on the short-term value of their stock. And then you've got hedge funds, and you've got day traders, you've got everybody else who's driving a very, very short-term view of the market. And so, again, I talked about this earlier. So, kind of what's wrong with that? What's wrong with that, from my perspective, is corporations have every incentive not to look long-term. They have every incentive to really focus on profit maximization for shareholders. And I at least believe that even if corporations don't care about everything else, because even though they're sort of they're legal beings, they don't have a moral conscience, they will never have a moral conscience, that they can't continue to operate the way they are. One of the most fascinating projects I've been working on is one with Dow Chemical. Dow Chemical has hired the Nature Conservancy to do a complete repricing of all the natural resources that they use. And there's some fundamental issues that they and everybody else, again, if you look at the big corporations, they recognize this is happening, they're running into. The first is, if they do an analysis, and they recognize that the water that's being used in their processes is, say, 50 times what they're currently reporting it. If they start actually reporting it at 50 times, what's going to happen to their stock price? What's going to happen to the valuation of the company? It's going to plummet. So alternative B is that they then talk to everybody else in the chemical industry, and they all get together, and a lot of that is what's happening. You'll see Nike and all the apparel, the shoe companies and the apparel companies and the electronic industries. A lot of that getting together of industry is really to deal with some of these fundamental issues, because they can't do it alone. But one of the issues with getting together is, A, we have very, very robust antitrust laws, and B, a lot of these companies keep their intellectual property safe, their processes safe from people stealing it and doing what they're doing through trade secrets. And so it's very, very difficult. So the one thing, because this is more of a biology audience, I was just going to mention, it's very similar to biology. The form of an organism really determines its substance. And so what has happened over the last couple years, actually over the last 10 years, is all kinds of different alternatives have arisen. And I'll go through a couple of them. Hybrids are when nonprofits set up for-profits and vice versa, and I do a couple of those each year. Constituency statutes relying on statutes in some states that were put in place in the 1980s for anti-takeover reasons. They don't really work. The L3C doesn't really work. The benefit corporation has some issues as well. But all of these, the point of this is that there has been, on the state level, a lot of experimentation with different forms. And when all of these different forms, and I'm going to talk about the one that I worked on in a second, all of these different forms are trying to get to the same place. What they are doing is they are trying to create incentives, but even more than that, a legal requirement that boards and management emphasize social and environmental factors, which I just think is very, very exciting. I hear a lot about B Corp being one of these, and I just want to clarify for everybody, B Corp is not a new corporate form. It is a good housekeeping seal of approval. You pay a certain amount of money, you take an audit, and you send it in to them, and you become a B Corp. Any legal entity can become a B Corp. So I wanted to clarify that, because I hear that a lot. So I will end talking about what I started working on. And I started working on drafting this about 2002. And now I would put about 100 to 200 hours in every year, pro bono. This is mainly weekends and evenings, because I just got excited about it. And now it is law. And at last count, there were 23 flexible purpose corporations set up in California. And there's also a very similar type of corporation that has been established in Washington State, which I'll get to. And basically what happened was I got together 9 other corporate lawyers in California, and we started working and meeting about twice a month for 4 or 5 hours and drafting a new type of corporation. And this new type of corporation requires the board and management to emphasize certain environmental and social factors that are agreed with shareholders. And that's it in a nutshell. And it provides additional protection. This is designed to look very much like an existing corporation, and to function as an existing corporation, and to take mainstream capital. The difference between it and almost all of the other alternatives, to me, the alternatives are all interesting, and some of them have positives and negatives, but they really all are an extension of the nonprofit world. And the FBC, in my perfect world, I could convince Chevron to convert in this. It can be used by public companies, and I mean, that's the world where I play. And so my desire was to create something that a private equity fund that I represent could invest in, and that really could be used, and to change the playing field, to require our largest corporations. And so I, of course, have a lot of legal detail on how it differs from a corporation. I will skim through it. And it has this special purpose. It has protection boards and management from liability. We have provisions for mechanics for converting in and out of the form. We have required reporting requirements, because I really believe that an organism that is watched behaves differently. And we have an enforcement mechanism. And it's being used. And as I mentioned, Washington has a form that comes into effect on June 7th, 2012, and you are the second state that has adopted this new form. And it's very, very exciting to be here. So that's it. Thank you.